I recently made 2 wood and leather knife sheaths. Sort of came out of a need to have some improvement or to have one. And I thought I would like to share some of my insights or views on making them today, maybe some of the pros and cons, and it might help some of you that might be planning on making one for your knife. This one I just finished. This is for a Puma Original Bowie knife from 1966, and I really like the way it came out, but I'm going to give you an idea of how they hang, because I think it's important when you see knives and you see sheaths. It's like, well, how do they look? And it actually hangs really nice. So I will I'm going to go back to the shop and show you different knives and my thought processes and how I did them. Here are the various sheaths I've made recently for 2 different knives. I started out, and I did a video the other day of this Cattaragaus 225Q that I had, and I needed a sheath for it, and I originally made just a scabbard to protect the blade because the old leather sheath had just rotted away, and that worked really good. But I was on a long drive home, like a 7-hour drive, flat road through the middle of California, and there's very little to do other than follow the straight line in front of you and watch for traffic. And I got to thinking, you know, I should make one with leather and actually make a sheath out of this. Well, this one I had already rounded off the edges and everything, and I had an open bottom on it, which talk about that in a minute. And it worked for what it was, but it was too stiff for one thing. As a sheath, I don't want to have to, you know, pull the knife out hard. When you make a leather sheath, you would make it stiff to pull in and out, but that's because the leather loosens up over time. So you want something that, for me anyway, that you can just drop the knife in. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to make it differently, and I want a closed bottom on it. So I made this sheath, and I did the video I made on it. I just found an ratty old belt that I had, and I used it, I glued it on, but I rounded off the edges, and I'm really happy with the way it came out. You know, it's going to, if it bounces against your leg or something, it's not going to catch. So it's just, it came out really nicely. And one thing I like about it is you go to put the knife away, you know, you get this very satisfying drop. You know, it just drops right in. So that worked out well. Well, I had this other knife, and this was a Puma Original Bowie knife that was my father's knife. And he bought it, it's dated 1966, so I don't know when he bought it. So it's the original Puma steel knife back when Puma really made some wonderful knives. Has a fantastic stag handle, and I wanted to give it a nice sheath. The sheath that came with it was, to be honest, kind of flimsy, and by flimsy I mean, yeah, it really kind of floppy. So they changed the design of this sheath several years later, which is a good thing, because this knife actually hits that rivet in the bottom when you put it in. It's like, well, that's stupid. You know, they could have just 1/8 of an inch larger would have made all the difference. And they could have used some heavier leather. There is a welt, but you can see it's cutting, just getting in there. This knife hasn't even been used much, but pretty floppy. I just wasn't that impressed with it, and every time I went to put the knife in, it would, it snags there, it snags there. You know, it's like, well, that's just not right. You know, you got to kind of finesse your way into it, you know, what kind of damage you're doing inside. So that was like, okay. has my dad's name on it, which was kind of cool, so I'm going to keep it just for that reason. But then I decided I'll do this one, and this is what I came up with. I have some tooling. I bought some tooling leather, and this is very heavy grade. I think it's like 9-10 ounce, something like that. Very heavy grade. So what I did, and the idea was, and it came across pretty well, is I wanted to have a leg lanyard on here so you could tie it to the leg. That's what the original one had a hole, and I thought I'd keep with that. It also had this top loop for securing the knife, like a double secure thing. And well, that's a good idea. And it had a, you know, a loop over here. It comes from, you know, many people will say, well, you know, it's on that side. If you're going through the brush, you could catch something, a twig or something that would open it. Okay, that's true. But it's a heavy knife, and not as heavy as the Cattaragaus. And you also have this extra security tie up here, and I don't, you know, that makes it a little harder to get the knife out. But you know, if you were doing some very vigorous activity, it would be worth probably to secure it that way. I also made it so that, you know, you could flip it back out of your way most of the time, and then, you know, you can just put the knife in and out, you know, without having that get in the way, and the belt would go over it. What I did, you can see with the leather, I folded it over and tapered the leather down, skiving I think it's called. I used a belt sander to do the taper, the skiving, and then with both of these sheaths, I glued the entire thing on with wood glue, and I used Tight Bond too, but I think any good quality wood glue is good. I loved how wood glue penetrates wood, and I did a test, comparing, because I wanted to know. So I was comparing the wood glue to contact cement, and what I found was, okay, they both held and the leather tore when I ripped them off. Now, you know, that was good. So it did bond to the wood fine. There was better penetration of the wood glue into the leather, even wicked out into here a little bit, where you know, this actually tore off of the wood right at the beginning here. So I have a little bit more confidence in the wood glue, and I just had to do a test to find out. It satisfies me anyway. I was going to put a post on the wood like this, because I kind of like that idea. But for one reason or another, I couldn't get what I wanted in time and a way to properly secure it. Because of how I make these sheaths, I actually ended up just using a regular snap and putting a screw in and screwing it down, and that's actually, you know, really nice and secure. I'm not the least bit worried about that. These are natural. This is natural leather finished in walnut oil. So, you know, the change in color is pretty dramatic. The walnut oil really darkens it. And I think it's a very nice finish. And then I did put a little LP wax on it. But, you know, the walnut oil really did the coloring. So that's it. What I would do differently, if you're thinking of making a sheath like this, well, I'll show you the inside. I have no issues with a high carbon steel knife like this, a work knife. You might get some scratching, you know, putting the knife in and out. I don't really care, especially about the old knife. The newer one, it's already got quite a bit of use and scratches on it, so I wasn't worried about it either. I just see it as a user. One thing you can do is you could line it with pigskin. Now, I'd heard, well, you can also line with felt or something like that, and I'm like, well, you don't really want to do that. You know, it'd get wet or dirty if you ever put the knife in the sheath dirty. Even with pigskin, I don't know how that works. Plus, that's a deadly point on this knife. And I can't imagine trying to put the knife in every time without snagging the pigskin or something. That's why I actually beveled these slots. So you go to put the knife in, you've got a little bit of leeway there. But if you had pigskin, you've got to wrap it, pretty much wrap it around, and I could just see me stabbing that. But that's certainly an option. Leather sheath, you probably wouldn't have to worry about scratching it up so much. Maybe that's not an issue. But I think the advantage, of course, there's a couple of huge advantages. Wood doesn't attract moisture like the leather does. So a leather sheath, you know, can get damp mildew on its own, and then can damage the blade just in long-term storage. That's actually what happened to the Cattaragaus. It was in a sheath, it was in a drawer, and the sheath got all moldy, and the blade itself rusted really badly. So, you know, I pitched that. And the wood sheaths are really nice. Plus, they're hard. You know, I mean, seriously, you don't move them. If you fall over and you hit it on there, it kind of protects some blades from bending or some such thing. So anyway, I think that's about it. One nice thing about a sheath like this is you can see how much narrower it is this way. The old sheath, I guess if I can line that up right. The old sheath has to be quite a bit wider to accommodate the stitching, where you don't have to do that with these because you just don't have to have that much material on both sides. And the top is, you know, no thicker than the leather, right? Essentially. The bottom, you want that wider anyway, so the bolster has something to sit on without, you know, deforming the leather. That's you know, okay in some situations, like this one. You can see how deformed that is, and maybe that's why it was pushing the blade up into the top of the sheath and cutting it there. I just think it certainly hangs better. It hangs beautifully, even without this tying it on. It actually hangs really nice. One other thing about the old sheath I didn't like is the position of this tie was down lower, and that meant that, you know, when you did run it through the knife, it would actually hang out much further. It would hang out to like here. It didn't do much to keep the knife in tight, keep you from losing it. So I don't know why they did that. It just seemed to be really silly. And anyway, I think this was maybe a clever, stylish design at the time, but not really as functional as it could have been. So that's what you have. I'm actually extremely pleased with the way both of these came out. I have no issues with carrying them that way. I would enjoy it, being out in the field, carrying one of these knives in a sheath that's a little different. You're not gonna see another one like it. Now, if you make it, you can use different kinds of woods, and I guess I would encourage you to have fun if that's the way you're leaning. You can have a leather sheath. You can make those awfully fancy. Nothing wrong with that. But I might make more sheaths in the future. I don't know. These are the only two knives I care about making sheath for right now. So that's where I am with that. And if you have any questions, I guess you can leave a comment. but there's no stitching on either of these sheaths, and no rivets. No rivets. There's 2 snaps and some cord. I did want to mention one thing about knife ventilation and ease of manufacture. This first scabbard I made, I just ran my saw blade through a piece of wood, you know, a couple times so that it fit the blade as snugly as I wanted, and I just left this end completely open. And I honestly know of no reason not to do that even in a sheath. There's like no issues there. Any water or liquids would of course drain out, and it doesn't really interfere with anything. When I made both of these, I made them with a closed bottom. Quite a bit more complicated actually to make, because you got to run the saw blade in a couple of times, you know, then use a smaller blade. And this one I had even a bigger problem with, because the shape of the blade puts the arc clear down at the bottom. So if you wanted to use a round circular saw, if you project this out, you're really getting right through, too close. And I could have made the sheath longer, but I ended up having to go in with I had my slot here, I had to go in with my drill actually and drill out to get this groove deeper so that the blade would fit down in this area. But I think it's nice, and there's no drain holes in either of these. Now I've seen people, you know, deliberately drill a hole in the back here to let any moisture run out. You could certainly drill one in the bottom. I opted not to. I mean, how often am I going to be falling in the water off of my horse and swimming to shore and then having a wet sheath or something? I don't know. I don't know what those scenarios are. I'm sure there might be some, but I don't think I'm that rugged of an outdoorsman anymore. So anyway, that was a thought on open bottoms. But I certainly don't see anything wrong with this. I mean, this is just, it almost makes sense to do that. It's certainly easier to do that. And if you wanted to, you know, you're just going to make a scabbard, a knife cover, you know, like this. You wouldn't even, you could make it so that you could put the knife in either way, right? So this could just be a square bottom, and it could be shorter. I actually have this longer than I needed. You can see it's a little bit longer than it needs to be. But the only reason I have it the other way is that it lines up with the pommel, or not the pommel, but the finger guard down here, so that it's lined up nice and clean. So anyway, there's a couple of thoughts. How do you retain the knife? Do you retain it here? I prefer this method dramatically, I think. I think this is an interesting way. I originally had this with a snap on the other side, and I pulled it out and reversed it so that the snap goes to the back when you're carrying it, so that if you do brush it with something, you don't pop that open. That's turned around. I probably would have preferred having this down here, which would hold this in and be easier, you know. In some respects, you grab the knife, you just pop it open and pull it out. But this was traditional. This is the way they held these originally. And this is a very heavy knife, so you know, if you're having it tied down here, you get a lot of flex and the knife could be swinging around. Holding it in nice and secure is a good thing, I think. I can't think of anything else. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you got something out of it, even if you don't decide to make a wood sheath. I will say there's obviously other ways of making it. You could do this in 3 pieces, and I would consider that, especially if I were going to line it with pigskin or something. You could, do a top piece, a middle piece, and a bottom piece. The middle piece, you wanted, you could even make it out of a different kind of wood, maybe even all 3 pieces out of a different kind of wood. And then you're going to have the leather on the bottom. It could be an interesting stripe pattern. I kind of think it's nice to make it all disappear. And if you use the same kind of wood, you could probably do that too. You really can't even see that there's a piece glued on this edge, can you? I mean, that's the nature. You can line up the grains a little bit. If you look at the end, you can see a little bit of difference there. But if you did a middle piece, then you just do a top and bottom. Put your, you could put your liner material right on there, glued on, and then do the center piece. Lay your knife out on the center piece and draw around it, and then cut it out. With a saw. I would make it bigger to start with, like considerably, so that you have plenty of room to glue it. Because if you're going to end up with, a 1/8 inch thick edges, glue joint all the way around, that would be kind of tricky. So I'd start bigger, and then I would cut it down to size after the glue set and begin my shaping. And don't forget to taper this. You can see on both of these, they're tapered from here down to here. There's no reason to keep this extra wood down here. There's nothing really going on, and you've got the bolster or the pommel sitting on there, so you need the thickness. But you don't need it down on this end. So, once you get this shaped right, then you can just, cut this off, and I think it makes it a little nicer angle. Okay, I can't think of anything else. I probably will, but again, thank you for watching, and any questions, feel free to ask them, and I'll try and keep an eye on responses and comments.